Yeah. Um, because I've been around Kanab for a long time, we've lived there in Kanab now, my family and I, for about 28 years. I do a lot of hiking. Like I said, I like to trail run a lot. But I started bumping into cultural sites. This will tie into Ian. Ian mentioned that Utah is incredible with cultural sites, and Kanab and Escalante area, Grand Staircase, and the Kanab field office has many cultural sites. But I started to learn about this guy named Neil Judd. If you had a chance to read that right there, I'll give you a moment. Anybody here eating out of a Dutch oven? Some incredible things come out of Dutch ovens. I spent a great deal of my early years on Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument up on 50 Mile Mountain. Still get up there once in a while. One of my favorite ways to get up there back in the day was by pack horse. And some of my employees are incredible cowboys and they're incredible packers. Sean Stewart is one of those. He lives over in Tropic. Sean and I have spent a lot of time on 50 Mile Mountain, and you can pack a lot of stuff up on pack horses. And eating out of Dutch ovens, you can have some incredible meals. When I read this about Neil Judd, I thought, this is a guy that liked to be outside. And Neil comes about in Kanab area about 1919 or so. And I wanted to bring some attention to this presentation to Neil Judd. There's not a lot of people in Kanab that know who Neil Judd is. Ian, are you familiar with Neil Judd?
No, this is first for me.
Okay, good, because I wanted to be a first over Ian. I wanted to be able to say that I knew something about cultural resources and archaeology. So I'm hiking around, I find these sites, really cool sites. It really makes me angry when I find a site that somebody comes in and they abuse in some way. And we went through an issue like that recently. If you read the news a few months ago, down in Buckskin Canyon, we had an issue there. But that was one of the few in my career that we were actually able to find the perpetrators and see that they were brought to the attention of the law and went in front of a judge, and we were able to see at least something come out of that in terms of being able to find out who did it and file some fines there. So it really makes me upset when people go in and ruin these sites, or they go in and they hurt these sites. And we are low in staff. I'm hoping to get an archaeologist back in the Grand Staircase. And then we have only one for the Kanab Field Office. So the combined acreage of Kanab Field Office and Grand Staircase, that's about 2.6 million acres. And only having two archaeologists for that makes it difficult to get around and look at all those sites. So we appreciate Ian's program helping us out. Anyway, I wanted you to see that because I wanted you to see that Neil was the kind of guy that liked to get outside. He liked to be out in the resources, in his arena of cultural resources, and he liked to eat out of a Dutch oven. Age of discovery. I said that Neil was around in about 1919 in Kanab. There were some really cool things going place around the world in the early 1900s. Not that there isn't cool things going on right now, but as somebody who likes to look to the past, I often think, as long as I had some of those things like Tylenol and Mountain Dew, it would have been fun to be part of some of these things, because these people lived adventurous lives. In this time period, Neil was around when people are looking for the South Pole and the North Pole. And if you know anything about Ernest Shackleton, anybody heard of Ernest Shackleton? He got himself in a bad way, if you know what happened to Ernest. But anyway, all that stuff's going on, and Neil's around kind of in that same time period, but we don't really talk about Neil because the things that he did maybe weren't world famous, but they were famous for King County, and particularly famous for those parts of southern Utah, King County, and then into northern Arizona. So that's when Neil Judd comes in. About 1919, he finds himself in Kanab. How did he get, a little background on Neil. He was born in Cedar Rapids, moved to Salt Lake City in 1901, became a public school teacher, gets his degree from the University of Utah, starts working for the Smithsonian, gets a master's degree, and finally comes out to King County. Interesting thing about the Smithsonian, I'm going to mention another archaeologist here in a minute, a gentleman that was a friend of mine. Some of you that were around when Grand Staircase was created might remember a guy named Doug McFadden. Doug passed away a few years ago. He was our archaeologist, first for the Kanab Field Office, first for Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Prior to Doug's passing, and he knew his time was short, Doug and I argued a little bit over whether or not bison were native to Utah. I didn't really care if they were or not, but I just liked to make Doug mad because he didn't think they were native. But there are a couple of rock riding panels around Kanab that actually have bison on them. And Doug would argue with me, how do you know that's a bison, Harry? And I'd say, because it has a big hump on its back and horns, and a couple of people are chasing that thing with spears. He didn't want to admit that until he went back to the Smithsonian to look at Neil Judd's, some of the things that Neil Judd excavated out of the area around Kanab. So I get a phone call from Doug McFadden while he's back in the Smithsonian. He said in Neil Judd's stuff, his collections, there was a little envelope. That envelope was labeled buffalo hair. That wasn't good enough for Doug, so he was able to get some of that hair, and we did a DNA analysis on that and some other items that came out of a place I'm going to show you here in a minute. And it came back as this little analysis, this bag of stuff came back as some elk material, bighorn sheep material, and bison material. And so I told Doug, there were bison in and around Kanab, maybe not many, but somebody in this slide I'll show you in a minute or two was eating a bison, and that came from the Smithsonian. And Doug was able to go back to visit one of his heroes. He really admired Neil Judd. Doug was able to go back and look at some of Neil Judd's work that he excavated and is in the Smithsonian. So getting to Kanab, let's go back to Neil Judd. Just to get here today, I had to let people know where I was going. I had to check out a vehicle. I have a checkout board where I have to say what time I'm leaving, what time I'm coming back, in case they have to go out and look for me. If I travel overnight, and if you work for the government, I know there's several people here that work for the government, and you have to fill out a travel request that has to be approved. You have to show, are you taking your vehicle, a government vehicle, or a private vehicle? A lot of things you have to do. I get the impression of reading a little bit about Neil, you didn't have to do those kind of things back then. He came from Washington, Smithsonian, gets to Salt Lake by train. From Salt Lake, he has to travel down to Marysville, Utah. You've been to Marysville, you've seen those train cars in there. There used to be a train track that came through Marysville, and that's where he got off at. So his trip from Salt Lake to Marysville is interrupted because the engineer and the conductor on the train decide they want to hunt quail. Can you imagine that? They stop the train somewhere and say, we'd like to hunt a few quail. Neil has to wait. He's itchy to get to Kanab. And then they get back on the train, start the train up again, shoot it. They shot a few quail and they take off again. So now he finds himself in Marysville and he doesn't know how to get to Kanab, but he has to get to Panguitch first. So he hitches a ride with it says telephone repairman, and that's how he gets to Panguitch. I've not once had to hitch a ride working for the federal government. One, because we usually have everything all planned, like I said, and two, I don't know how many people would pick me up if they knew I worked for the federal government. But Neil, that's how he gets there. So he gets to Panguitch, and he still has to get to Kanab. And so he gets another ride with the sheriff. And I was going to ask a trick question. Anybody else in here ever had to ride with the sheriff? Neil has to ride with the sheriff. The sheriff offers him a ride, but the sheriff says, I'm taking a prisoner to Kanab. You're welcome to come. The sheriff and the prisoner sit in the back seat while the sheriff's daughter drives the vehicle. I don't know what kind of vehicle this was, 1919. Some of you can guess that. You know vehicles better than I do, but Neil had a job. He's sitting in the passenger seat, and according to his writings, they strapped some kind of a branch, a sapling he called it, to the running board. And so when the daughter driving the vehicle leans over to Neil and says, we've got to slow the car down, his job was to pull that stick back and try to slow the car. Anybody have a brake like that on your vehicle right now? If you do, you ought to get your brakes inspected. So his job was to pull that sapling back and slow that vehicle down. 6 hours to go from Panguitch to Kanab. That's about an hour and 15-minute ride right now. 6 hours to get down to Kanab. Neil really wanted to get to Kanab. Excavation sites. The bulk of his time in and around Kanab was spent in Cottonwood Canyon. Neil Judd had actually been to Kanab in 1915, but just for a day or so. And he had talked to some of the residents there, and they had told him about some of these sites around Kanab, but he didn't have time to go look at them. He left did whatever he did between 1915 and 1919. In 1919, he came back to the Kanab area. His original intention was to go out on Arizona Strip and look at some of those sites there. But because of a drought in the area and limited water for horses and mules, they opted, let's not do the Arizona Strip piece. Let's go back into this Cottonwood Canyon area and look at some of those sites. He gets in, he meets these gentlemen I'll show a picture of here in a moment, the Riggs family. He meets B.A. Riggs, Brigham Riggs. There's a senior and a junior. He meets the senior, and the senior offers to let Neil Judd stay on his property up at the head of Cottonwood Canyon. Neil, it is interesting if you read some of his works, there are some rock art in Cottonwood Canyon that is more indicative of the basket maker people, and he feels like there were two cultures there, so that was kind of a cool piece about that as well. These are the Riggs. These are the people that he became friends with. He credits them for showing him the area. There is one Riggs left in Kanab. We're acquaintances. I visited with him recently, and he let me go out on his property where he let Neil Judd stay, and showed me some of these things that Neil Judd recorded, some of those rock art features, the basket maker features, as well as some small ancient Puebloan sites that are on the Riggs property. So this is the site where that bison hair, buffalo hair came out of. This is the Cottonwood site. It's really cool for me to visit some of these sites and know that Neil Judd was there and he excavated this and helped us learn from these sites. This is some of my Boy Scouts. That's my son, the one kind of sitting highest back there. I'd like to take them to these sites because it's a really, really good opportunity to educate these young men. We talk a lot about the site, talk about the do's and don'ts at the site, what they shouldn't do, what they can do. We talk about photography, and if they take a picture, not showing people where it's at. Anyway, it's a really good time to talk to them about that. This is another view of that site. When Neil was in here, Neil Judd, he located this site, the Cottonwood site, but there are many more sites in there, and I choose not to share those locations. We don't stop people from hiking in there, and we don't have a sign that says don't hike in there. There's really cool cultural sites. We're just gonna leave that alone. This particular site, if you do decide to hike, there's about a 12-mile walk. And so that keeps most of the people out of there. There's not a lot of people that like to walk that far, it seems like. Like the last presentation, one just prior to me, people want to get in, get a photograph, get a quick picture, post it, and get out of there. With this being a 12-mile walk, it does keep most people away. Now, in closing, I only have a couple of minutes. Neil did go to some other sites, and I had found through my friend, Doug McFadden, the archaeologist, who also liked to go and visit these Neil Judd sites. Doug had sent me a picture of a place called White Butte, and he said Neil Judd had been there, and it was out on the Priya Plateau. This is it. Neil took this picture in 1920. I wanted to find this site simply to say that my friend Doug had been there, Neil had been there, and I thought it'd be pretty cool if I went there. I don't disclose this site to people. It took a little homework for me to figure out where this was. But Neil took this picture in 1920. Doug McFadden, my friend, archaeologist, colleague in the BLM, who passed away, he took this picture in 2009, later sent me the picture and said he had found the location. I didn't go back with Doug, I'd forgotten about it for a long time. But when I started kind of doing the homework, pulled out the map of the Priya Plateau and I wanted to find this, took some sleuthing, but I was able to find it. I took this picture not too long ago, same site. And then I had another fellow BLM photographer, BLM employee with me who likes to do black and white photography. And he took this picture with me standing down there. So this is another spot that Neil Judd visited. I hope what I was able to do today is just let you get an idea on who Neil Judd was. If you're in and around the Kanab area and you start doing some hiking, you find some cultural sites. Neil Judd had a big impression on the sites around Kanab. And I just wanted you to know that there is this guy, Neil Judd, who was floating around here when other people were traveling around the world making big discoveries. Neil was making big discoveries in Canaan. So, thank you.